My name is Andrew Samwick, and I'm a professor of economics and the director of the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center here at Dartmouth. We're pleased this afternoon to bring you a panel of inspiring stories from women in leadership. The panel will be moderated by Terry Norelli, who is the former Speaker of the New Hampshire House and former President and CEO of the New Hampshire Women's Foundation. Ms. Norelli serves as this year's Perkins Bass Distinguished Visitor at the Rockefeller Center. This visitorship and a companion internship program for students interested in public policy commemorate the public service of Perkins Bass, who was a member of the Dartmouth class of 1934 and who served the state of New Hampshire in elected positions at the local, state, and national levels. Each year we have the privilege to honor a New Hampshire citizen who has made an outstanding contribution in the field of government. Perkins Bass visitors make several trips to campus to engage with students, faculty, and the larger Dartmouth community. Achieving true equality for women in society, and in particular in the workplace, is a work in progress. We were delighted to use the occasion of Ms. Norelli's visit to convene today's panel, drawing on her years of effective work in the legislature and the nonprofit sector, advocating on behalf of women and girls, and the similarly distinguished work of our panelists. Today we'll have the opportunity to assess how much progress toward equality has been made and how much work remains to be done. By way of a very brief introduction, most of us know Ms. Norelli from her years of service and leadership in the New Hampshire House. She has long been committed to women's advocacy, economic and civil rights, and the environment. As Speaker, the first Democratic Speaker in over 80 years and the first woman Speaker, she worked tirelessly to pass civil unions and later marriage equality, among a number of other legislative accomplishments touching on health, the environment, and poverty. I would like now to turn over the stage to Ms. Norelli so that she can introduce our panelists and begin our program.
Well, thank you. And so honored to be here with all of you at the Rockefeller Center here at Dartmouth. And with such an accomplished panel of women to have a conversation this afternoon with and about women in leadership. So before I introduce them, I just want to set the stage a little bit for the conversation. There was a study done last year, a comprehensive study of the state of women in corporate America, and it was done by the McKinsey & Company and Lean In org. If you haven't had an opportunity to see it, and this is a topic that's of interest to you, you might want to check that out. It was titled Women in the Workplace 2015. And I want to just start out with 4 biases that they found are commonplace in corporate America. The first, and some of these might just ring true to you personally. I have this feeling I might see a few nods or smiles in the audience. The first one is the likability bias. That's the one that says that success and likability are positively correlated for men. Unfortunately, for women, they're negatively correlated. So that puts a double bind on women. The second bias that they found was performance evaluation bias. So male performance is often, overestimated compared with female performance, especially if the women happen to be in male-dominated or traditionally male-dominated fields. Women are typically hired and promoted based on what they've already accomplished, whereas men tend to be hired and promoted based on their potential. The third bias is performance attribution. So women get less credit when they have successful outcomes, and unfortunately they get more blame when there's a failure. Men typically, and these are the results of this study, not just my personal anecdotal opinion. Men typically attribute their success to innate qualities and skills, whereas women tend to, I'm already seeing the smiles and the head nods, right? Women tend to attribute them to external factors. Either they worked really hard or they had help from other people. And then you have the fallout from that, which is when women are given less credit, and by the way, they also give themselves less credit, then their confidence sometimes erodes, and they don't put themselves forward for those next assignments or promotions that might stretch them. And the last bias that they found is pretty commonplace, is the maternal bias. So they said that motherhood triggers assumptions that women are less competent and that they're less committed to their job and their careers. So they tend to be held to a higher standard, and they tend to be offered fewer opportunities. So that's sort of the frame for the personal experiences that will be shared today. So we're pretty fortunate to have with us a panel of women who themselves have bumped up against these biases, who have beat the odds, and now are in leadership positions in their field. So as I introduce each one, what I've asked them to do after that is to sort of give you a little contextual framework for their workplace, something about the gender balance or whatever of their environment, however they want to describe that. And before I'll just do that for the political realm. Here in New Hampshire, we're pretty fortunate. In fact, we might even think that most elected officials in New Hampshire are women. And why is that? Well, we have Senator Jeanne Shaheen, who's the only woman in U.S. history that has been both a governor and a U.S. senator. We have the 2009-10 New Hampshire Senate, which is the only chamber in U.S. history that has ever been a majority women. We are the only state in the history of our country that has ever sent an all-female delegation to Washington. And in fact, 3/4 of our delegation is still women. Our current governor is a woman. Our current Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is a woman. And in fact, in 2012, and there are a few women in the audience that were there for this, in 2012, when Governor Hassan was sworn in by Chief Justice Delanis, it was presided over by Speaker Norelli. So you might get this wrong impression that, as I said, that all elected officials in our state are women. We should celebrate these successes. But I think we shouldn't just rest on those laurels. I think we have to look underneath and look long term. And I just would note that of the 6 legislative leaders today, not one is a woman. Of the 5 executive counselors today, not one is a woman. And in the New Hampshire House, we have dropped to only 27% of the House members being women, and the New Hampshire Senate is only slightly higher. So that's sort of the political context. Dia Draper, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the MBA program here at Tuck, unfortunately is ill and wasn't able to join us today. But our first panelist is Jennifer Levy, and she's the Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility at Hypertherm right here in Hanover, a business that I must say has quite a reputation, not just in New Hampshire, but I think around the country as being a very progressive business. It's an associate-owned company with 1,400 associates worldwide. They design and manufacture the world's most advanced industrial cutting solutions for use in a variety of industries like shipbuilding, heavy equipment, and manufacturing. And in her role as VP of Corporate Social Responsibility, Jenny focuses on Hypertherm's corporate shared value strategies through environmental stewardship, community engagement, and corporate philanthropy. Since joining Hypertherm, after she graduated, by the way, from Tuck in 2004, she's held various management positions including Director of North America Marketing and Director of Environmental Stewardship. And prior to Hypertherm, Jenny worked at McMaster Car Supply Company in various leadership and director roles within operations and marketing. And as part of her community involvement, Jenny serves as co-chair of the board of New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility, as past chair and now secretary of the board of Cover Home Repair in White River Junction, and as a board member of Vital Communities in White River Junction. And she lives in Norwich with her family. So Jenny, why don't you set the stage for us about women in your environment?
Sure. So as you heard, I work for an industrial manufacturer. So the manufacturing field is generally more male dominated. In the U.S. overall in manufacturing, there are 26%. Overall in the U.S., there's 26% women in manufacturing. In New Hampshire, there's 31% women, and at Hypertherm, it's 24%. So we're around average. Where I think Hypertherm, despite this glowing description, falls off dramatically is actually in senior leadership. The average in the U.S. is 15% women. In New Hampshire, it's 17% women, and for Hypertherm, it's 8%. So we have very few women in senior leadership. I'm one of them. Our CFO is a woman. And in other areas of our organization, again, we're about on par. So as an organization, we are well behind on the senior leadership level.
Our next panelist is Roshni Pinto-Powell. She's an associate professor of medicine and associate dean of students and admissions at the Giesel School of Medicine here at Dartmouth. She's also the vice chair for clinical affairs in the Department of Medicine at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. Roshni's lived in the Upper Valley for the past 20 years with her husband, 3 sons, and her golden retriever, Juno. In addition to her family, her greatest joys are the practice of medicine, primary care at DHMC, and her role in education and advising at Giesel. She's been the recipient of numerous teaching awards, and by numerous, I do mean numerous, both at the graduate and postgraduate level, and was elected to the inaugural group of master's educators at Giesel in 2012. In her spare time, she enjoys, I don't know how she has any though, she enjoys reading, gardening, traveling, and although a late convert to the benefits of exercise, this too has surprisingly become an important part of her life. So, Roshni?
Thank you. One has to practice what one preaches. I want my patients to see me out running. So, I'm going to talk mostly about position of women in medicine from an academic medicine point of view. So after graduating from medical school, I did an internal medicine residency and then 2 infectious disease fellowships. And I made the choice to stay because my husband is a vascular surgeon in academic medicine. So most of the statistics that I will talk about today and the stage I will set is from that perspective. Life outside of academic medicine in corporate big pharma or in private practice is a little bit different. So in 1965, in the admitted class, the matriculated class of medical students all over the United States, there were 9% women, and only 7% of those graduated. In 2003, the numbers steadily climbed, and in 2003, we hit the maximum where there was 51% of the entering medical class being women. And it has fallen off since slightly in the last decade. So in 2013-14, we've settled out at about 47% of the entering class. This is the US. In Giesel, it's actually this first-year class is 64% women. So we're a little higher than the national average. But in sort of thinking about things and keeping up in the literature, because it's somewhat of interest to me, and when Terry sent me the McKinsey study, and just what a little bit I know about corporate America and banking from general media, Times, Newsweek, that sort of thing, the statistics are somewhat strikingly similar. Very, very similar. So despite the fact that we have 47% women entering and in medical school class, How many go on to residencies? Roughly the same, 46%. How many then go into academic medicine? Full-time is about 33%. And how many of those, so in academic medicine you have the instructor stage, assistant professor, associate, and professor. And it goes from, if I asked you which of those four do you think has the most women, or the majority of women, the instructor level. And as you go up that pipeline, full professors at 21% nationally. And we are similar here at Dartmouth. So actually, no, we're lower at Dartmouth. We're lower at Dartmouth. If you think about how many women nationally are deans, it's 16%. How many are department chairs? It's 15%. At Dartmouth, department chairs, as of last year, was actually miserably small, but in the last year, it's actually 50%. We have a lot more department chairs, women chairs in the last year that were appointed. So we're coming along.
And maybe at some point you'll let us know why you think that is. So our last panelist, Catherine Underwood, joined Ledyard National Bank, and I'm sure any of you that live in this area certainly know Kathy Underwood. She joined Ledyard National Bank in 2005 as the president and CEO. Prior to joining Ledyard, she spent her entire professional career with KeyBank in Maine. She started in lending and then spent the next 12 years in wealth management at Key, with responsibility for managing the function for the entire state of Maine. During her last 5 years at Key, Kathy served as their district president in Maine, with responsibility for all retail and business banking in the state. She serves as a delegate of the Independent Community Bankers of America. She serves on the board of the ICBA Securities. She's a board member and past president of the New Hampshire Bankers Association. She serves on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's Community Bank Advisory Council in Washington, D.C. She's on the board of Kendall here at Hanover, and also a member of the Upper Valley Corporate Council. She serves on the board of the New Hampshire American Heart Association and the AHA Founders Affiliate Board, where she's also the Upper Valley Go Red for Women chair. She recently completed a 6-year term on the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston, where she also served as the chair of their audit committee. Kathy has a degree in economics from the University of Southern Maine and is a certified financial planner. So welcome, Kathy.
Thank you. So today I thought I'd share with you some national statistics in banking, and sadly they're very similar to what we heard. I was hoping we'd at least be better than industrial companies, and it doesn't appear we are much better. 63% of employees in the banking industry are women. Unfortunately, though, very few of that 63% is in the management ranks. The statistics show that about 23% of women are in senior management positions, and those are typically in human resources and marketing, where 40 to 50% of those positions are headed by females. 11% are COOs and CFOs, and sadly only 4% of those are women CEOs. Statistics a little closer to home, just so that you know what's happening in our state and our neighboring states. If I look at New Hampshire, there are about 20 banks that are headquartered in New Hampshire that are truly community banks, and there are 2 CEOs of those 20. Vermont has approximately 12, and some of these banks are serving both states, so my number might not be exact. I may have counted them in one in New Hampshire versus Vermont. 12 banks in Vermont with 1 female. And Maine, 26 banks, 2 female CEOs. So really the numbers are not much better in the Northeast than they are nationally. And where I really see this is when I go to industry conventions with my peers, and it's clear that we're making no progress across the country. And sadly, even our industry associations are not doing things to support women moving up into the higher ranks of banks. And I'll tell you, the first time I went to an ABA conference, the spouse package was a purse My husband was not real thrilled. It was a Vera Bradley, so I was. But what does that say when the spouse package is a purse? The speakers at the convention were saying, when you go home, tell your wife this. And I thought, well, that doesn't really seem like a good thing to say. And I do notice even to this day, when we are at the events, people start talking to my husband about his bank. And he is real quick to point over and say, don't talk to me. The only good news is the lines to the ladies' rooms are short. But sadly, we really haven't seen much progress at all in our industry, and we have made zero progress actually in the last 10 years. The good news is for women that do get into the senior management ranks, I have seen that there are greater opportunities for people to serve on industry boards because the boards are very, very focused on getting more diverse representation on their boards in hopes of changing the culture and the way these banks are hiring. So I do think for women that are in senior management today, the opportunities that are available to them are far greater than they've ever been before. So we're working hard to help promote and encourage females to move into the upper ranks, but we have a long ways to go.
Great. Well, thank you. So just so you know, we're going to have a conversation up here. I have some questions that I'll field to some of the panelists. And anybody on the panel, if I haven't thrown it to you, but you have something you want to add, just jump in. And after that, we're going to open it up to the audience. So as you're listening, if something comes up to you that you think, I'd like to know something more about that, or I wish they had asked this question, you'll have your chance after this. So following up on what Kathy was talking about at every level and how I think you heard from everybody, as you go up in levels, the number of women in leadership gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So women are still underrepresented, and this is according to this report that I referenced, are still underrepresented at every level in the corporate pipeline. And the disparity is, in fact, greatest at the most senior leadership positions. So according to the McKinsey study, and Kathy talked about, the roles that were marketing and human resources, those are often referred to as staff roles. And then line roles are often the ones that are positions that are more directly related to the focus or the core business of the company. So according to the McKinsey study, line roles actually provide the type of experience that leads more directly to the C-suite, the COOs, CEOs, CFOs. But there's a paradox here because women are represented in staff roles consistently from one level to the next. And you see that that's been Kathy's personal experience in banking. However, women's representation in line roles is lower than expected at each subsequent level. So the higher the level, the smaller and smaller the percentages of women in leadership. So in other words, women move equally through support roles, but they have a disadvantage in the very roles that are ones that are more likely to lead them to those C-suite positions. So I really would like to ask all of our panelists, because as you can see, they've already been through this, to talk a little bit about, share with us what were the roles or the paths that you took in order to get you to the position that you're in now. So whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first. Mine's a very, when I was in college, I was working part-time in a grocery store, and one of my professors pulled me aside and said, you need to get a job that's really going to help you when you get out of college. And he said, how would you like to be a banker? And I thought, my dad's a banker, and that made sense. So I started as a teller. And I worked part-time during college. Well, the day I graduated, diploma in hand, I went to Human Resources and I said, I want a full-time job now. I have my diploma. I'd really like to work for this bank. And he said, "Isn't that nice, young lady?" And remember, it was a different era than today. And he said, "At our bank, females are tellers and secretaries. Which would you like?" And I said, "Well, neither, really. What I was thinking, I'd like to get into lending. My dad says that that's a good career path. And I recognize I have to start at the bottom." And he shook his head and laughed at me and said, "Teller or secretary?" Well, needless to say, I quit. Went across the street to another bank and said, "I'd really like to become a commercial lender. My dad said that's where the money is." And there are no females. And what a great opportunity. So I said, I would like to become a job in the commercial loan department. I'm willing to start at the bottom. I recognize that I don't have any experience. And during the interview, I was asked what form of birth control I was using. So times have really changed today than they were before. But I did take that job that was offered because I figured that that was what life was like. And I started as a clerk in the loan department because that is the line. That is where the opportunities are. And fortunately, in a little bit, we're going to talk about mentors. My dad was a great mentor, and he suggested that was where I should go. And fortunately, throughout all of my jobs at the bank, I did have mentors that carried me along and advised me. So from there, I went to the credit department and learned the basics. I became a lender, wealth management officer, manager of wealth management, and then ultimately the president of that bank. And then 10 years ago, was very blessed to be offered a job at Ledyard, where I am today.
Roshni?
I wish I had such an exciting story, but and maybe I suppress bad memories. But so I went to med school. I thought I was going to be a pediatrician, and as I tell my students in the third year of med school, as you're going through the various subspecialties, learning the material, it's sort of like trying out to see where you fit. And I realized that I wanted to be like this internist that I met who was an infectious disease physician. And so I stopped thinking about pediatrics and neonatology and instead thought I'd be an internist. Graduated, became chief resident that year, which was the first sort of responsible position that I had. It was fun. It was a teaching role that drew me to academia. I come from a family of teachers anyway, so to me, medicine is very much like teaching. You've got to really teach your patients about their disease process in order for them to do well, and by them doing well, you look well, so it's all good. Did my first ID fellowship at the height of the AIDS epidemic in Newark, that just decimated an entire city. Came here in the early 1990s, interestingly following my husband, who was a surgeon, and he was coming to do his vascular fellowship. We had our first child at that time, and there was no infectious disease position open here at Dartmouth. They had just taken 2 new ID physicians. And so I got a job in New London Hospital, but I didn't want to drive. In the middle of winter, I didn't know how to drive very well at that time, so I decided to do a second ID fellowship. It was wonderful. So I did a second ID fellowship here. There wasn't much HIV disease in 1991. In the state of New Hampshire. It was very good. I was the expert, having come from Newark. And then following that, interestingly, and I'm thinking about it, followed my husband again, moved to Connecticut, because he wanted a job there, a research job, and recreated my life. Started teaching, had our third child, and when we came, and all through this, I worked full time. Those were the days that things were a little bit different. After each of my first 2 children, I went back to work in 4 weeks because I had to. I was in service, and getting somebody to swap your month was not exactly an easy proposition. So we had our third child, and Dartmouth called and said, "Hey, we have a job for you, Rick, vascular surgery." He said, "Do you want to go back?" And I said, "I really love the place, but I don't think they have a job in ID because they just took 2 new people. Every time I came to Dartmouth, they just took 2 new people in ID." So when we got back to Dartmouth, I decided, okay, I will recreate my life again. So instead of ID, I decided to go back into general medicine. And this time, for the first time, I took a part-time job at 60%. And one thing led to another. Teaching was something I really loved. Got my opportunity. Somebody left a course director position at the med school. I got that, got the first teaching job, and then it just kept growing and growing. And about 9 years ago, we'll talk about mentors later, but the chair of the Department of Medicine asked me if I wanted to be the vice chair of clinical affairs. And I looked at him and said, clinical affairs? I know nothing about the business of medicine. He said, but you must have some gene in you. You're Indian. You must be good in business. It's like, okay, a little backhanded compliment. I said, okay, look, I'll try it for a while, and if it works, and if I think I'm contributing, then I'll do it. And if I think I'm a token person, then I won't. And it turned out I had a lot to contribute, because it's funny. I think in business sometimes you bring out a different perspective, an outside view on things that others don't think about, and you think outside the box because you don't know anything. And I'm not. The one thing I'm not afraid to do is talk. Or express my opinions. And so I did that, and that was really successful. I enjoyed that a lot. And then 2 years ago, an associate dean position opened up of students and admissions, and that's something I love anyway. I did it as a teacher and a course director all my life, and so wandered into that. So that's how I arrived at no major negative experiences.
I had an interesting confluence of experiences in college. I went to Wesleyan University, which is a super liberal place, a liberal arts college in Middletown, Connecticut. And the premise of Wesleyan is anyone who goes through Wesleyan, you've got to change the world. Right. That's it. Just get a degree, you go out and you change the world, that's what you're going to do. And so as a student there, I was thinking, well, how will I change the world? And everyone around me is going into academia. I thought I might go to the Peace Corps, Foreign Service. One of the jobs that I had in the summer while I was in college was working in a fish factory in Alaska. And actually it was on my resume for a long time because I got promoted from the salmon gutting line to the shrimp sorting line. Thank you. So I needed to show early trajectory in my career, so that's how I did it. So this confluence of here I am working in a fish factory, countless hours all through the night, and then this really strong kind of feeling of how am I going to change the world. And then I quickly realized I'm actually one of the only people I know that loves driving on the New Jersey Turnpike through Newark, New Jersey. I don't know why, I love it. I love the smell, which is pretty bad most of the time. I love the smokestacks. And for me, the reason why I loved that, and even then, was real things are happening in Newark. Real things are getting made, moved, created, disposed of. And that, for me, was very tangible and very satisfying. And I always say to people, if they didn't like Newark, I'm not from Newark, but if you don't like it, stop consuming, because this is the best sign of consumption. So leaving college, I realized, actually, the world works. So kind of the Studs Terkel take of things. And one of the best ways I could think of to contribute positively to the world was to be a positive leader of people in the workplace. That if I could try and create a respectful, healthy, fun, safe, challenging, accomplished environment, maybe that could be my way of contributing to the world. So that's when I started, well, maybe corporate job isn't going to turn, my head into horns and I'm going to turn into the devil, which is what we all thought at Wesleyan. And so I went out and got a corporate job at this big industrial company. And the reason why it's important to say that is, me walking through their door, I now realize as a recruiter of people on and off, and as I have for the last 20 years, is I was probably their dream come true. Not because I'm so awesome, but because I was a woman with this education who was genuinely really excited about being in industry, being in manufacturing. More smokestacks, the better. And so there I was, and my real goal was more people I could try and manage and lead and develop and be a part of. That was where I wanted to be. And I was an anthropology major in college, and so part of that is how do you learn about culture? How do you learn about how meaning is created? And that I applied directly to. Well, here I am, I'm the only woman within hundreds of people at this company who are leading this part of this one company I was in at the time. And I just used that to my advantage, and learned the culture, learned the language, and then was able to use that to basically drive my leadership style. And so just slowly kind of grew through the ranks, I think mostly because I was standing out in a totally male-dominated culture, and I was actually able to provide some value to that culture. And so that's kind of my path that's taken me through whatever, boring you on too many positions I've had, and you heard that in the introduction. And so my role now, I was in a more of a line role as the director of marketing, and it was an issue for me because I didn't know those statistics, but I saw that people from line roles become CEOs and people from staff roles don't. And I was asked to take on more of a staff role, corporate social responsibility. I'm not managing a P&L, profit and loss statement. I'm managing kind of a strategy of the company. And I remember talking about that and thinking a lot about that, and thought, at the end of the day, my first goal of providing positive influence in a work environment is still the goal for me. And this is how I can do that the most. And so taking on the role I'm in now, I haven't regretted it one bit, but it was definitely a pause around line to staff, to your point, Terry, around those points.
That's right. And remember what I said, the study found that women attribute their success to externals, and we've already heard that, in fact, just now from Jenny as well. And I think you also heard a couple of the panelists mentioned mentors and how important they are. The report also found that women's and men's networks are similar in size, but not surprisingly, their composition is a little bit different. So given this, women may end up with less access to sponsorship by others in senior leadership. So in fact, when men were asked, nearly 2/3 of them said that the senior leaders who helped them advance were mostly men, but for women, only about 1/3 said that. This speaks, I think, to the significance of mentors for women, since more leadership positions, obviously, as we've heard, are held by men. So, and if women aren't getting the male mentors, then that means that's one of those challenging spots for women. In particular, women leaders often say that mentors were particularly important to their development. And because everybody's mentioned this, and it is so important, again, I'm going to ask all of you if you have a particular mentor or two that really was significant to your growth. If you want to share about that, that would be great.
Yeah, quick. I had a very important mentor to me in the first factory I worked in this warehouse, and he was a man, and he was the director of that warehouse, and I just really admired his style he was very fair. He came in and left at the exact same time. You could set your clock to his arrival and departure to his kids' games, and I just admired his very clear, kind of balanced dedication to the work that he had and to the respect that he gave to people. And I talked to him a lot about that, because this was felt like was my calling, and so he seemed to be very good at it. What was interesting was I ended up taking his role. He left the company, and he was the one who came to me and said, all right, well, we know you're only 25, and we know you're the only woman around, but we really want you to lead this warehouse and take your role. I, of course, burst into tears, so that was, maybe I shouldn't share that in public, but because I was so overwhelmed. But he was a wonderful mentor figure to me in that environment. Now I consider my kind of mentor to be Barbara Couch, who many of you know in this area, as someone who just, for me, epitomizes values-oriented leadership and enlightened leadership. And yes, she's a woman, and yes, that's exactly one of the many things that I admire about her. She sets a bar that I could never accomplish, but I hope that we all can and try to. So she would be another mentor of mine that I've used actually in some key ways. Just to name one of them is, as I've come across hurdles that don't seem right to me, this is strange, why am I getting so much pushback on this project or this request that I've made? I'll go to her and I'll say, does this seem right to you? And she'll say, no, that's not right at all, because I've tried to explain away the hurdle, and I've used her to be kind of a sounding board for fairness and what is the ideal that we're trying to achieve. So that would be my two key mentors in my career.
I really like to make, especially in medicine, the difference between a role model and a mentor. Because we have a lot of role models. We look around and there are people we want to be like. So when I talked about the internist and infectious disease doctor, and I looked at sort of how bright they were, how much they knew, how accomplished, I wanted to be like them. And so he started out as a role model and was more of a role model than a mentor, whereas a mentor really is somebody who's looking out for your best interests, whose only goal is your success, and there's nothing in it for them. And that's very important to me in my advising role, because I often hope for my students to be much bigger and better and accomplish much more than I ever have. And I could say that having been here in the last 20 years, mentors come in, firstly you need many, not one. And they come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes they say funny things like, you must be Indian and therefore you must do well, or some nonsense, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I actually think the two chairs of the Department of Medicine, the last two, Dr. Cork and the current one, Dr. Rothstein, have been my mentors. I can see that they really want me to succeed, that they push me to the next level. It is very, I do agree, so we all have talked about the pipeline. How do you get more women leaders, you get more women at the table in the first place and sort of move them along? But it's a leaky pipeline. In every single field that we've here, there's pipeline analogies, but I feel the pipeline should have big holes and they leak out. The question is why? And one of the things is, yes, if you don't have enough women at the top, then it's hard to mentor. But at this point, I say it doesn't matter whether the mentor is a male or a female, and I, like I said, encourage multiple mentors, and I think that that's what we need to do to move along.
I've had many, many, many mentors, and they have come in all forms and sizes and shapes. Men, women, family members, people in my industry, people outside my industry. And I'm very fortunate to have mentors because I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself early on. And if it weren't for my mentors, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. Or if I was, it would have taken me a whole lot longer to get there. I've never applied for a job, and I've probably had 15 different jobs with 2 banks, but I've never applied for one. And I think as females, which using a typical characteristic is we don't often give ourselves enough credit. We don't often apply for jobs unless we're absolutely certain that we're going to be able to do it, and often don't take risk. And that's something I learned about myself at some point in my career, that I was the typical, I need to be sure that I can do that job before I take it, and I need to be sure that I can succeed and do the job well. So if it weren't for my mentors, I'd probably still be a teller, or that loan clerk. But one of my favorite mentor stories was the president of the bank that I worked at before I came to this one was leaving. And he took me to lunch one day and he said, I recommended for you to replace me. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. And he said, you're the person that I'm calling headquarters and recommending replace me. They've got a guy in mind, and I think you're the right person. I'm giving you a heads up. You're going to get a phone call. Just be prepared. And I went home and thought about it and thought, oh my goodness, I could never do that job. Nor do I think I want it. And sure enough, 2 days later, corporate jet flew in. Big boss comes in, sits me down and says, congratulations, we'd like to make you the new president. And I said, I don't think so. I'm not quite sure I really want this job. Well, you didn't say that to this guy. And he stood up and he said, I will give you the weekend to think about it. Call me on Monday. And reading between the lines, it was take this job or go find another one. So I went home sick to my stomach and called my dad, and my dad, my other mentor, said, don't be an idiot. Take the job. They wouldn't ask you to take it if they didn't think you could do it. And worst case, you're not good at it. You've got CEO on your resume. So I did take that job, and within a week realized that I really enjoyed the job and it was a good place to be. And but as I look through my whole career, it's been the mentors that have pulled me, pushed me, dragged me, begged me to move from one job to the other. And it started when I was that clerk in the loan department and there was a job opening in our bank for a credit analyst. I didn't apply for it. And about a week after the posting had gone out, I received a call from Human Resources asking me why I hadn't applied for it. And I said, oh, I don't think I could do that. And she said, we created the job for you. So that was the first time I was called an idiot, and it continued to be that way throughout, where if it weren't for my mentors who saw more in me than I saw in myself, I owe so much to them. And one thing I talk a lot about in my current position is, and when I go to women's conferences, is we need to be mentors to other people. And it's part of our responsibility is to help mentor other people, because mentors are so critically important in people's careers. And I am the perfect example of the importance that mentors can play in someone's life.
I like your dad.
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
So polls that have been taken show that if it is financially feasible, 70% of women would prefer to take family leave after having a baby versus 20% who would rather just leave the job to take care of their child. Polls also suggest that regardless of what your political stripe is, 70% favor paid sick days, paid family leave, and gender pay equity. So the McKinsey report found that women continue to do a disproportionate share of childcare and housework. So they're more likely to be affected by the challenges of juggling what's going on at work and home. We did hear that a little bit, I know, from Roshni. The report also found that parents of both genders are concerned about this balancing of work and family. If you're under 30, things are better in terms of the housework, but even under 30, women are still taking responsibility for most of the child care. The report also found that parents of both genders, that even if there are policies and programs in place, both genders, they tend not necessarily to take advantage of it. Why? Because they're afraid that they're going to get penalized on the job. So when we're thinking about your own life and that work-life balance, Jenny, what about, how did you deal with that at the various phases of your life and trying to balance those?
Yeah, I love the key word in your question here is phases. And I feel like that was something I had to learn, that I wasn't being untrue to myself because I was no longer this kind of gunner in my 20s going for everything, working 18 hours a day, willing to be moved to Cleveland on a moment's notice. Yes, I did. And loved it. But that when I didn't feel that way in my 30s, I thought, oh my gosh, am I losing my edge? Do I not care? Have I lost some drive? And realizing, it's another phase. And I think that that's really key. If I had known that, but then kind of that there are phases that you're willing and able to do something or not to do something, and that's truly just confined to that phase, and then that phase moves on, and that phase could be as short as the hockey sports season, which my son is just coming out of now, or it could be a phase of toddlerdom and paying for daycare and the decisions and requirements that dynamic takes. So that's just kind of I think a key part of your question. And so for me, that has definitely changed in phases. I was surprised that when my kids were really, really young, I have 2 children, when they were in a home daycare and just all they needed were diapers and snacks and naps, I actually wanted to work more. Their needs were covered, they were thriving, they were growing, they loved me, I loved them, and I thought, well, let's get back at it here. And now I have a 5th grader and a 4th grader, and I think, yikes, there's a lot that went on the playground today, I didn't get to hear about that, and now I find myself in another phase, and who knows what the next phase will be. So I think, for me at least, it started with me in my own sense of forgiveness around what I could feel like I could do and not do in any one of these phases. And then my ability to negotiate what I thought I could get in those for my needs in those phases in terms of a schedule, a shift in responsibilities, delaying a project that I needed to start until I could have a little bit more bandwidth because my husband was in North Carolina for 3 months and was coming back later. So just things like that, just kind of being more fluid, I think, for myself, and then trying to apply that hopefully from a credible position with my career and asking for accommodation for some of those phases.
Roshani, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, a little, just in the sense that this is a complicated question. Certainly it's phases of our career, but there's other life things that happen. And each situation is very, very unique. So again, the early part of my career, having graduated from med school now 31 years ago, was a really different time in medicine. And the expectations for both male and female, but residents, the expectations for residents, I mean, we were the ones that did the 36-hour, every third night kind of thing. And the fact that I was married to a surgeon and his career was really busy. And I never ever felt, and I tell students this is really important, it's a very unique thing, but if you feel like you're taking the back seat, or if you feel like you're making a choice or giving up something, I think that starts off the dynamic very differently. You have to say, this is what we want to do because this is our life together, and then you just make the choice from there. So I never ever felt like I sacrificed. I know I said it sort of in the way it sounded like I redid my career, but my career was easier to redo or remake as an internist than him as a surgeon. So it never ever bothered me. I do think I have reached that phase, a little past yours, where now the kids are grown up and I'm back to being full-time. A full-time job in academic medicine is full-time plus. But it's wonderful. And I think we should all have the choice to do it. We should realize that each individual situation is quite unique, and there's no right or wrong. Just be happy with the choice you make and go with it.
Great. Well, 74% of companies report that gender diversity is a top priority of their CEO. Unfortunately, less than half those workers believe that gender diversity is a priority for those CEOs. So they say it is, but it's not viewed by the employees as being a priority. You have 70% of men that say they believe that diversity is really important, but only 12% of them believe that women have fewer opportunities. Women observe a workplace that is biased against them, and they believe that they're disadvantaged by it. And senior level women view their gender as an even bigger disadvantage than entry level women do. And that's also borne out by the statistics about the pipeline. So we've got a dichotomy here of experience versus reality, or perception perhaps versus reality, of gender bias, and that's just one of many, I think, significant challenges in the workplace. So the next couple of questions I want to ask about challenges and opportunities that our panelists have had. So Kathy, maybe you'd like to talk about one of your big challenges that you faced, and maybe what you did to overcome it.
Sure. And just so you know why I didn't answer the last question, we made the decision that we can't all answer every question or we'd be here till 10 o'clock tonight. And I haven't mastered the family balance, life balance issue, so it was the one I chose not to answer. The challenges, it was interesting when she asked what was one challenge that you had to deal with, and boy, there are so many that I've learned from. But I think the biggest one in my life was when my husband has had a heart disease for pretty much most of his life since he turned 35. And in my 4th year of being the president of the bank, he hit the point where he needed to be hospitalized and wasn't going to live unless he got a heart transplant. So I have 3 small children. I have this bank that has 650 employees that I'm running. I'm on 4 nonprofit boards, and my husband's in Boston, hospitalized. And so it's a personal thing, but what it did for me and the lessons that I learned from that awful experience were very important lessons that I carry with me today. And those are, one, family always comes first. And there were times prior to that I didn't always put my family first. If I had a project to do and I had a choice between meeting that deadline or family dinner, I probably chose meeting the deadline. So it was a great eye-opening experience for me, and family did come first and has ever since. I learned to prioritize and do the important projects, and there are projects that don't have to be done. And I learned to prioritize and put other projects aside. I also learned it didn't have to be perfect. I was always striving to be perfect, and you don't have to be perfect. And no one noticed when I wasn't perfect. So that was pretty nice to see too. And I learned how to ask for help and how to delegate. And I learned I didn't have to do it all myself. So it was a fairly big challenge that I faced, and I learned a lot from it. And it has made me a different person in the second part of my career, which has been great. My husband did get his heart transplant, and he's doing very well.
Great, thank you. Jenny, do you want to address that one too?
Yeah, I've had some very tactical challenges. I'm often the only woman in the room, not necessarily in Hypertherm, but with our customers and in our industry. One interesting example, I came as a marketing director to visit one of our major strategic customers, and I went with 2 of our salespeople who were both male. And we walked in and we were announcing kind of a new product that was coming and a whole set of programs and promotions that we've been working for months on to roll out across this huge national customer of ours. So I walk in and I've got binders and before we were paperless, and walked in. I'm really excited about this, and they're shaking hands. There's like the chest pump half hug thing. And so then I come in, like all eager beaver, ready to go. And the guy's like, hey, yeah, and shakes my hand, but doesn't look me in the eye. And I think, all right, tough start. All right, no problem. So I sit down, and a bunch of people flood in from the customer, and they happen to all be men too. And so then it's time for me to speak. And everyone's looking at the other 2 guys like, well, I thought you were going to take it away from here. What is she doing? And so as I spoke, only 2 people of those 6 that were there kept eye contact with me the whole time. And at the end, they thanked the 2 men I was with. Thank you so much. This is amazing. And I was like, I didn't take it personally, in that this is clearly their frame. And I don't think it's personal because the work was good. But they were unable to acknowledge me and the work I had done and it coming from me. And that was a challenge in that moment, but I learned a lot from that around, all right, well, how do I queue up this work next time? How do I try and change that dynamic? I never had a great solution for it, except for just trying to stay steady, unruffled, carry on. But I had, unfortunately, countless examples like that kind of dealing in the market. That's changed, though. That was probably 10 years ago, and things have changed with our customers like with the rest of us. And so I've heard since that it's gotten better. But
Well, and forewarned is forearmed. So
Forewarned
the
is
forearmed.
forearmed.
Time it takes you back
yes.
a little bit. So, Roshni, do you think that women face different challenges than men do?
I do. I do. So in academic medicine, there's a lot written about this and using a lot of metaphors. So the sticky flow that women face, where they kind of stuck to the bottom, can't seem to get up, or the glass ceiling, you come almost close to the top, sight of, the dean position or something, and you can't quite get there. You have the glass cliff, where you are given a really big leadership position, but no support, and there's no way you're going to succeed, so you're going to fall off that cliff. And the whole sort of labyrinth model is, just kind of wandering around trying to find help and support. it does seem, ironically, with you, and the other thing I think you talk a lot about is the stereotype threat. Stereotype threat being if you categorize people in a certain way, they usually perform to that ability. So if you sort of, the classic, I think, social psychology example of this experiment was in 1991, where they had women, male and female students, all thought they were very good math students, take a math test. And they told half of them that this was just a test and go to it. And they told the other half that some of the questions were definitely going to be hard for women. Which half do you think women did poorly in? Mm-hmm. So the sense of priming, and the sense of stereotyping, I think, occurs today in the subtlest of level. Mm-hmm. And it's not always a conscious thing. It's not because people are mean or want us to fail. It's an unconscious bias. And one of the wonderful things about a forum like this is to talk about these things and educate people that these exist. It's good people. We all have them. Men and women have these biases. And so when you talk about stereotypes too, it's sort of descriptive stereotypes. So we say things like women are more communal and nurturing, and so they can't be good leaders because they want everybody to succeed. Or we say things like men are agentic. They're agents of success and change and good leaders. So that's sort of descriptors. But then you flip it over and make, if you can have them be prescriptive, because what people should and shouldn't do. So when women are agents of change or act tough or speak out, it's like, what is she doing? Is she trying to act like a man? And vice versa. So we definitely have, there is a challenge that we have to be conscious about, or all understand these unconscious biases we have. And there are things that I think we can do, and I'm not sure if maybe this is another question of how we can change this. What things we can do. There are absolutely things we can do to change this.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to chime in? What about opportunities? Do you think women have the same opportunities in the workplace as men do? Roshni, you look like you're ready to go for that one, so go for it.
So in academic medicine, well, so it all depends on how you define an opportunity. In academic medicine, if you define an opportunity as an open job opening, yeah. But in academic medicine, I actually have done good research on this. There's a very nice paper that came out from Johns Hopkins that shows that a lot of these opportunities for promotions, the decision is made not by an open search, so it's not a transparent and open process, but you're appointed by the chair or whatever. And so again, these sort of subconscious or unconscious biases it's open for everybody, but the unconscious bias makes it not really an open opportunity.
Well, and you mentioned in the prior question about leadership styles and expectations, and I was actually looking at some work that was done by an HR firm in Washington, D.C. on men versus women and their leadership styles, and they found a few things. Their thought was that women tend to prefer a flat organizational structure that allows a more collegial experience, whereas men think that a little competition or a hierarchical structure actually is a little bit better, and that then it's really clear what everybody's role is. They also found that women leaders like cooperation and collaboration, but men tend to think that competition will result in a better outcome. Women tend to focus on relationships, whereas men tend to focus on performance. And the last thing that they found was women tend to communicate indirectly, meaning that they communicate their expectations indirectly and allow for a lot of latitude in how they're achieved, whereas men might give much more precise instruction on what they want done. So You may agree with those, and your experience may or may not. But given this view that women lead differently than men, is there anything that you think, Jenny, that you've done differently because you're a woman, either intentionally or unintentionally?
I think that it relates to the perceptions so the unconscious biases, the challenges that I think, and Roshini spoke to this in the workplace, and then my accommodation for those realities around me. So I'm conscious and have been conscious in my career that often I am one of a few women that people are now responding to as their leader in industrial environment. And so I am constantly trying to play out those dynamics, and my mind is always looping through their eyes back to me, or looping through their previous experiences with other women, whenever that was, and back to me, and then trying to play to that. So as a woman, I think I'm managing those dynamics that are my interpretations and analyses of the situation. And then that changes my leadership from where it might be naturally, because I know I'm operating in that environment. I'm naturally a chatty person. Like at a Hypertherm, we do DISC, D-I-S-C, and I'm an I. I like to start every meeting. How you doing? How was your weekend? And I realize that drives people who aren't like that crazy. And so I have to be, I do a little bit of that just because I feel like we're humans, and that's, we're coming to work as humans, not as robots. But I have to force myself to transition away from a natural inclination of mine into another space, because I realize that's the norm that I'm operating within, like it or not. I like that. It's fine. I've grown to accommodate for that. But as I look around me, I don't think that other people are playing like the four voices in their head out and going through other people's eyeballs and looping back throughout a meeting. I just don't think that's happening. And so in that sense, I think it does definitely influence and inform my style as a woman leader.
And Kathy, what about decision-making processes? What are yours, and do you think that men and women have different decision-making processes?
In general, I do. I think women tend to be more collaborative, more consensus builders. We tend to want to talk to other women, particularly, or other people that have had the same situation that we've had, and learn from them. One of the challenges I think that I realized early on in my career was my natural tendency to be collaborative, to be consensus. And I think in general, the men that I've worked with tend to be more make the decision and move on. And I think one of the quotes that someone gave me a long time ago was, women have an instinct for caution, and we need to find balance between our natural caution and know when to make decisions quickly and move forward. And I think there is that fine balance, but there is that difference. And I notice it where I work today. I want to do some research first before I get to the decision. You can see the men in the room going, "Oh, for crying out loud, lady, let's get on with it." And it is truly the way it happens. But you just need to be aware of it and recognize it and be responsive to it.
Great. Roshini, did you want to add something to that?
In the very descriptors that you read were stereotypes, right? It's the way we think about the male leader. Male leaders are assertive and they're decisive, and women leaders are collaborative. It would be really nice, I think, to get to a place where we decide, what does good leadership look like? Mm-hmm. And I don't know about everybody else here, but I want good leadership to be collaborative. And I'm proud to do that. And I don't care whether it's because I'm a woman. So I think when we get to a point where we start describing things for what they are, rather than these stereotypes which we all lean into, and naturally, I do it too. It's not like, and not make any excuses for the kinds of things we do. I think collaboration is wonderful. In all my positions, I love having a collaborator. Collaboration, if you think, just yesterday at a meeting, we had an idea of what we were going to do for a workshop. And if we hadn't collaborated, the product that we ultimately came up with would have been completely different and totally devoid of the energy and excitement and the absolutely different nuances. So collaboration brings this wonderful perspective. What's wrong with that? Let's celebrate it.
That's right. Great. So I am going to open it up to the audience if you have questions. And I think there's a walk around mic. Is that true? Yep. Okay. We're going to have, there's a question right up here if you want to. She's very anxious because she was ready to ask that question right away. We want to make sure she gets an answer.
Thank you. I don't think this is on.
And you might just add if you're a community member or a student, or if there's some little piece you want to tell us about you.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes. So, although I look like a student, I'm not. I'm a staff member here at Dartmouth.
Nice.
So I kind of have a twofold question. So first I'm going to premise it by saying I grew up in a household where my mom was an economist and then later on went into the medical field and does stuff more in business related in the medical field. And so therefore I grew up in a house where mom was very, decisive. She knew what she wanted. I saw that role model. So some of the things you're discussing I didn't realize until I got into the workforce. And on top of that, being a person of color, my identity marker was based more on race than it was on gender because I felt that being attacked more. And therefore, I didn't realize that my gender impacted my ability to, be how I was looked at as a person in the workforce until I was married, and in an interview was asked about my marriage and if my husband would be moving different places because he had a job that within business that caused him to travel. And it hit me wait, I'm a woman and you're asking me this because I'm a woman. This has nothing to do with my capabilities or the fact that I may have graduated from an Ivy League institution or anything like that. And so I want to hear from all of you or one of you, when was the point, or if there was a point when you realized you were a woman and you were looked at that particular first time, oh, I'm a woman in this workforce, and that impacts how I'm being looked at, where I might go, my ability. And if you never had that first experience, or if you had that first experience in the workplace, what may have blocked you from having that experience prior? Was it your home life or was it something else?
Go ahead, Kathy.
Well, I shared earlier that my very first job application or interview was clearly I was not going to be looked at as my male counterparts with the same diploma in their hands. And it continued on for a long time. That I always say that I could excite a labor attorney with all the stories that I have throughout my career, but I learned early that it was going to be an obstacle, so I was quick to focus on all of my positive strengths and not respond sometimes to some of the questions about the husband or do you plan to have a lot of children or all those questions, but just to move on and answer them in a professional way.
I'll add to that. I'm old enough, and I bet there are a few other people in here as well, who are old enough to remember that the classified ads were jobs for men and jobs for women. So it happened before you ever got in the first door. So yes, things have definitely changed. We aren't there yet, obviously, but they've definitely changed. I don't know if either of you want to add anything to that.
I mean, for me, my college experience was this ferocious equality environment. I dare you to think of me differently because I'm whatever, a woman, tall, short. And there was definitely a very aggressive approach I had of this I dare you feeling that I took out with me initially into the workforce that I can only imagine must have been, now I think about it, a little bit overwhelming probably for this company that I went to, but I remember just like staring them down, and I remember there was a lot of silent pauses on their end, and I now realize probably they were used to like, so, and I just was like glaring at them, daggers of feminism, you know, and because it wasn't really from my family, that was definitely something I acquired in college, and I think having been in an environment that was so ferocious in that way, I think that kind of inoculated me for a period of time. And then it started, whether I was worn down or I weakened and I didn't go back to Wesleyan enough, where later I did start to realize that, and more when I was married, and that my kind of marital status to someone who I could procreate with, you know, that became more of an issue. People were making comments and asking questions. And for sure, when I showed up to my job at Hypertherm pregnant, which is totally, potentially a career-limiting move, but in a way, like, question answered, gonna have kids, because here I am. And so then it was, will I come back, will I won't come back? And there were definitely moments where people didn't want to assign me parts of this project I was working on, because the assumption was, well, you're not coming back. And then when I was back, 13 weeks later, not 12, not 4, but, you know, but people were upset that last week because it was, you know, then that kind of quelled it a little bit. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes. In the yellow jacket.
First of all, thank you for being here. And my question is actually related to what you just kind of said. So I feel that there's a culture right now moving towards kind of downplaying the motherhood and childbirth aspect of femininity, because it's viewed as kind of limiting a traditional view of being a woman. It's like, oh, being wife and mothers is kind of an older perspective. But I feel like that could be detrimental in itself, because you can't really alienate being a mother from being a woman. So I guess like my question is, what are your thoughts on it in terms of this culture observance that I have, and what you thought of this kind of dichotomy of whether or not to downplay being a mother and being a professional woman. So.
So I only know what I know, coming from academic medicine up here, Dartmouth, New England. And things have changed incredibly since I was a med student and intern. Nowadays, med students have children, residents have children. We support them, we encourage them to make no excuses for it. In fact, it's sort of the residency programs and things are, they're mandated to comply and make it work. Now, am I saying that there's absolutely no? I'm sure there is. But I think the way I like to advise my students is make no apologies for that. If you want children, then by all means go ahead and find the best time for you. Your career will wait. The old days were also, if you don't do it right now, you might miss the boat. That's not the case anymore. People are having late careers. You know, people are doing things, going into research. People have gone into private practice for years and then come back into academic medicine. So the landscape has shifted a lot, at least from my perspective, or my vantage point.
And I think your very question is exactly why the polls show that so many women and men really support things like paid family leave, and they support it for both mothers and fathers.
Yes.
It's really important to do that, because then there can be, I think it was you, Roshana, that talked about choice. Then there can really be choice. If the father wants to stay home and the mother go back to work sooner, or if the mother wants to stay home and the father wants to go back to work sooner, that's the choice of the family for their own family dynamic. If those kinds of policies were in place. Of course, most of you probably know that we're the only industrialized country in the world without maternity leave, but we're one of only a handful without parental leave. And I think that would go a long way to affording mothers and fathers the ability to make the choices that work for them at the times that they want to be able to make them. So,
just one thing to add to that. more that I think about that question in my own career, and part of it is the diversity of my own team that I lead now, and relating to a question you were asking earlier about phases of career. I actually try and encourage us to talk more about any need for a leave. So there are people with elderly parents, and it's not going well, and they've got to go to Iowa and take care of things. And that is no less important than me having a newborn at all. They're equally important. And I feel like accommodating for changing demographics of aging workforce, different cultural family dynamics, and saying, look, there needs to be a more open and available leave policy and I'm not going to judge you. You being a woman is not better than me needing to go take care of my elderly, being a mother. You having a newborn is not better than me needing to take care of an elderly parent. We as a corporate world or an organizational world should give space for that, whatever that is in those phases of life that you're encountering. There's a woman who works for me who doesn't have children. She's older and she chose not to have children. And she's helped me understand that. Like, we're actually a parentist world in many ways, even though the benefits still aren't good enough. But we should think of it more broadly, in my opinion.
Well, and I think we certainly heard from Kathy, her own experience. That doesn't have to be your elderly parent. It can be your spouse.
Exactly.
Or for that matter, it could be yourself. So when I talk about paid family leave, I do in fact talk about it in the broadest sense, but spoke about it in this particular case because the question was about parenting.
Yeah.
But I absolutely agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, other questions? We have one right here in the green sweater.
Hi, I am a PhD student here at Dartmouth College, and my question is regarding your husbands, if they be equally successful either in your field or very successful in their own field, or I guess, for example, if your parents had also a job that perhaps gave you any insight into your field, do you at all feel in any way that has discredited your accomplishments as a woman? And I'm asking this from the standpoint of lately there's been a lot of talk of political dynasties and that perhaps discrediting any woman's accomplishments in her field.
So is your question if they're in the same field or just at any kind of
I guess it could be with any field, but I know the lady in the red, your husband is also in medicine.
Yeah, I personally don't think so.
I didn't think you would.
Right. So he is a surgeon and is very accomplished in his field. I'm an internist. Maybe if we were both surgeons, we'd be different. I'd be better. No, I'm kidding. It's not. It is really not that way. And he's very supportive. We just actually did. It's very funny that you asked this question. We did the undergrads asked the two of us to come and speak to them as a couple in medicine and how things were going. And it was very sweet. And he answered a question similar but a little bit different. And he said, it is the best thing in the world to be married to a physician. Because that person truly understands. When we come home, we can spend 10 minutes really decompressing the day, and it feels so wonderful to have somebody really understand what you're going through, really understand the issues. But then I had to hasten and say to the students, but it's okay, you don't have to marry another physician. These were pre-med students. But I don't think it diminishes anybody's accomplishment. I never ever thought of it as a competition at all. I want him to be extremely successful, and he was delighted that I was coming here today to do this. So I don't know. I don't think so, at least not personally.
I think there was a question on this side. Lori.
Madam Speaker, thank you for being here. So I'm a community member, and I served in the legislature while Terry was Speaker, which was an honor. I see other legislators here in the room also. I wanted to know from you, in your experience in 2012, how would you respond to the question, why then why did we do so well with having so many women in top leadership positions in New Hampshire? And I actually got asked that question by an older gentleman in Vermont who was comparing Vermont politics to New Hampshire politics, and he called me and he asked me that question. And I've got some thoughts about it myself, but I'm curious about you being one of those leaders, how you thought we got to that place, because it was truly remarkable in the country. And I'll never forget the day that we had a woman who swore in the governor who was a woman, and we had a leader of the House who was a woman and a leader of the Senate who was a woman, and had all 4 of our congressional members be women. It was an amazing moment for women in New Hampshire. But what are your thoughts? How did we get there?
So I do think that's an interesting question, and I think historically we've been ahead of the curve. I'm not necessarily certain that all of the reasons are good reasons. I think, for instance, that one of the reasons that we've had more women in the legislature, we're down now, but we've always been among the top few in the country, among the highest states in the country for a percentage of women in our state legislature. I think that has to do with the fact that our districts are small, so we don't have to raise very much money. They're volunteer. We don't get paid, or unless you call $200 for 2 years being paid. It's a commutable state, so the vast majority of legislators can actually go back and forth every day. There's no way, I had children and I had a husband that traveled, so there's no way that I could have been served in the legislature if I had to go to the Capitol and stay there for a few days at a time. So I think there are some dynamics about New Hampshire that provide the pipeline. So the legislature being so large, having so many opportunities, really provides a pipeline for these other positions. But I also think there are some good reasons. One of them has to do with a conscious effort to recruit women. Women often don't step up to run for public office. They don't want to raise the money. They don't want to be, they might take the public criticism very personally. So there are a lot of reasons why women don't want to do it. The whole idea of having to cross the T's and dot the I's and know that we can do 100% of the job. Very often women think, what do I have to contribute to this? And so women respond and run when they are recruited. And in fact, I was recruited to run for the legislature by another woman. And she kept at it because I had all those negative responses about why I wasn't going to run. And ultimately, I will say that ultimately what convinced me was, I had served on a lot of social service boards and around issues that really are kind of political in nature, reproductive health care, sexual violence, things like that. And she convinced me that the work that I would be doing was the same work, it was just a different venue, and it would have a statewide impact. To which I finally responded, okay, I can try that for 2 years. 18 years later, I didn't run again, and I was the one that was doing the recruiting. But I do think part of that was a very conscious effort. I specifically know that the term that we had a majority of women in the New Hampshire Senate, there was a concerted effort, I would say, by a couple of men in this state that really went out specifically looking for women candidates. And those are the kinds of very proactive things. Remember, I said that a lot of CEOs or their companies say that gender diversity is a high priority, but people don't feel it. And why? Because they're not doing anything proactive to create that diverse population. So those are just some thoughts, my own personal thoughts about it. I think we have time for one, maybe one more question. There's one right here. There's a mic coming down.
I'm very loud. I don't know. I'll hold it back here. I'm a community member. I work for WISE. And exactly what you were just bringing up. I would love to hear some of your strategies as leaders in industries that have such poor statistics, the strategies that you're employing to pull more women into these leadership roles.
We don't have good strategies yet. We have created a diversity and inclusion council of members of the management team to figure this out, to look at data, to tell the stories. That's why I could pull the stats I did at the beginning, 8% and others, because we're starting to look at it and to figure it out. We're looking at best practice companies to try and learn from their strategies and programs that work. Tonight I have some good ideas from a co-panelists. So we're not in a good spot for that. Ask me in a couple of years, hopefully I'll have some really cool things to tell you. But
I think in academic medicine, we're really trying these things. That's not to say that we've done them. We're starting. So a couple of things that I've sort of talked about: educating people about the stereotype threat, writing positions in gender-neutral terms, unconscious bias training of people in the interview groups to understand it and be more aware and perhaps make different decisions. Leadership training by increasing the pipeline, increasing the numbers of women in the pipeline early on, by training women in leaderships. Like medicine has this program called ELAM where they train women in leadership positions. As more of us get further along, mentoring and helping people along the way, something we really didn't talk about here, and perhaps some of it is a gender era thing, but most of us have had men mentors rather than women, and perhaps that's because there weren't enough women at the top. But the more we're coming close to the top, the more we can give people a leg up, I think. So I think these are the strategies that we hope will help.
I participate in a lot of these types of events in the industry, in the banking industry, sharing my experiences, talking to other women bankers. I also challenge organizations when I don't see a diverse representation. For instance, one of the industry boards that I was on sent out all the new board members for the year, and there was not one female in the package of 20 new board members, and I called them on it. I said, you should be ashamed. And I think if you raise awareness, it makes a difference also. And I also mentor a couple people personally.
And if you Google Women in the Workplace 2015, you'll come up with the McKinsey report. It's very accessible in terms of ability to read it quickly, get some information out of it, and at the end they do offer some particular strategies. And thank you for the work that you and WISE do for women here. So I want to say thank you to the panelists for being here and sharing your experiences with us today. Thank you to the audience, particularly to those of you that had questions. And, I think the takeaway, we heard it, I think, even in the very beginning of the conversation all the way through to the end, is we've come a long way, but there's clearly a lot of work to do. We here represent many different fields, and yet regardless of the field of endeavor, our experiences and the numbers are very similar. The biases and the challenges to overcome are very similar, and I know I've learned more here today, and I hope our panelists and our audience have as well. So thank you very much for being here.